There were 412 tiles on the ceiling of the Vora Station cafeteria. Dara had counted them twice. She sat in the far left corner, tray in front of her, fork moving slowly through something the food station called a nutrient blend. It tasted like wet cardboard mixed with regret. She ate anyway. Complaining cost energy she did not have. Around her, the cafeteria roared with life. Not human life, the kind that clicked, buzzed, rumbled, and whistled. Vora Station held students from 31 species, and most of them were very loud about it. The Halories sat in the center, always the center, their big frames taking up twice the space they needed, laughing at volumes that made the nearby Luri students fold their ear flaps down in irritation. The Thari clustered near the warm vent on the east wall, their feathers fanned wide, speaking in a soft tonal language that sounded, to Dara, like wind chimes in a slow storm. The Vrathi sat alone. One table, far corner, opposite side from Dara. There were 3 of them on the station. They never mixed with the others. Dara understood that, at least, she was one of 6 humans on Vora Station. The Galactic Union had opened its academic institutions to humanity 14 months ago, mostly as a political gesture. Humans, the Union had collectively decided, were not especially impressive. No psychic ability, no natural armor plating, no venom, no enhanced strength, no ability to survive vacuum. Just soft, medium-sized creatures from a medium-sized planet who were oddly determined about everything. The scholarship that brought Dara here had been awarded to the top student from her region's science program. She had won it by 8 points. She had told no one except her mother, who had cried and then immediately started worrying about whether Dara would eat properly in space. She would not. She pushed the nutrient blend aside and pulled out her tablet, scrolling through the next week's xenobiology reading. Professor Allen ran a demanding course. Dara liked demanding courses. They kept her head full, and a full head left less room for the particular loneliness that came from eating alone in a room of 400 creatures who all had somewhere better to be. Tomorrow was lab day. Partner assignments posted that morning. She had already checked 3 times. Her partner was listed as Sketh. Vrathi, 2nd year. No other notes. When the assignment board had gone up in the lab corridor, she had heard the reaction from the other students before she even reached it. A low murmur. Then someone, she thought it was one of the Halori students, had made a sound that translated roughly to better her than me. Dara had read Sketh's name on the board and felt nothing except a mild curiosity. She had never spoken to a Vrathi. They were a predator species, 4 arms, scaled, with a secondary jaw structure that most other species found unsettling. Their homeworld had gravity nearly double the Union standard. They were, by most accounts, built for things that were not comfortable to think about. But the one called Sketh had been sitting alone in the xenobiology lecture for 6 weeks. He always took the seat at the end of the row. He always left first. He carried his equipment in a case he never let out of reach, and he took notes by hand in a script Dara did not recognize. She noticed things. It was her one reliable skill. After dinner, she took the long corridor back to her dorm block. Vora Station was enormous. A slow-turning ring structure with 5 residential sectors and an academic core at the center. The corridors were wide enough for a Halori and a loaded supply cart to pass each other, which meant they felt cavernous to someone of Dara's size. She had learned to walk close to the wall, less likely to be stepped on, less likely to be noticed. She was passing Junction 7 when she heard it. Laughter first, then a sound beneath it, structured, controlled, but wrong. Like something being very carefully held in. She slowed. Around the junction corner, a group of Halori students stood in front of a section of wall where someone had painted a mural. It was a Vrathi image. She recognized the style from the cultural exchange file she had read during her first week. Bold lines, deep pigment, a scene of something ceremonial and old. It was genuinely very well done. One of the Halori students was drawing over it with a station marker. The others were watching and making appreciative sounds. Dara stood at the edge of the junction. She was small and quiet, and they had not seen her. She counted the students. 4 of them. The one doing the drawing was the largest. She had seen it before in the cafeteria. He was always in the center. She thought about her lab report, which was due in 4 days. She thought about the reading she still needed to finish. She thought about her mother's voice message from last week, reminding her not to cause trouble. She filed all of that away and watched the mural disappear under clumsy marks. Then she walked on. But something sat wrong in her chest for the rest of the evening, like a stone she had swallowed without meaning to. She sat at her desk and opened her reading and read the same paragraph 4 times without absorbing a single word. She closed the tablet. She lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling and thought about the Vrathi student who sat alone at the end of every row. She thought about what it meant to take up as little space as possible. She thought, I know exactly what that looks like. She did not sleep well. The first thing Sketh did when Dara sat down at the lab bench was move his equipment case 6 inches to the right, creating a clear, unobstructed line between them. She noticed. She said nothing about it. Professor Allen handed out the session objectives, and the room filled with the usual shuffle of tools and whispered conversation. Dara read the objective sheet once, and then looked at the specimen in front of them, a preserved sample of calori root, which apparently had a cellular structure that changed under specific atmospheric pressure. They were meant to document the changes across 3 pressure settings. Sketh had already started. His 4 hands moved with a precision that made Dara think of a machine. Not in a cold way, but in the way of something that had practiced emotion until it became completely effortless. He calibrated the pressure chamber, noted the baseline reading, and adjusted the seal with the kind of quiet efficiency that did not announce itself. Dara set up her side of the documentation log and said, I'll record. You adjust. He looked at her. His secondary jaw did not move. His main jaw was closed. He just looked and then gave a single nod, so small she almost missed it. They worked that way for the full session. She recorded. He adjusted. When she made an entry he disagreed with, he reached across and pointed at the number without touching her side of the log. She corrected it. He went back to his work at the end of the session. Their report was the most complete in the class. Professor Allen made a note of it without much fanfare, but Dara saw him glance at their bench twice before moving on. She came back the next session with the notes organized into a shared file, labeled clearly, structured the way she had noticed he preferred. Results first, method second. She left it open on the bench when she arrived. He sat down, looked at the file, looked at her. She was already reading the new objective sheet. She did not wait for a thank you. She had not done it for a thank you. By the third session, he was arriving at the bench before her. She took this as a good sign and did not mention it. What she continued to notice quietly and carefully was everything else. The way he angled his body when another student passed too close, shoulders drawn in, the 2 upper arms folded tight, head slightly lowered. Not fear exactly. Something more like the practiced habit of making a large, dangerous thing look as small and unthreatening as possible. She had seen that in humans before. Usually in humans who had learned, at some point, that being noticed was not safe. The way his notes were written in tiny, compact script, even though the paper was wide enough for large lettering. He did not want to take up space, even on a page. The way he always knew where everyone in the room was. Not aggressively, just always. His eyes would track a movement at the door and then return to his work without pause, a reflex so smooth she doubted he was conscious of it. Dara had a younger brother who had been bullied for 2 years before anyone noticed. She recognized what long-term watchfulness looked like on a body that had learned to perform calm. Drin was not subtle about it. He was a second-year Halori student, and in the social structure of Vorstation's student body, Halori second years apparently believed they had earned the right to fill every room they entered. Drin was the loudest of them. He had a group that moved with him, laughed when he laughed, and went very quiet and careful when he was in a bad mood. The equipment incident happened in the 4th week. Drin walked past their bench during a busy session, and Sketh's pressure calibrator, which had been placed well within their workspace, ended up on the floor. Cracked. Drin kept walking. His group made a sound that was not quite laughter, but close enough. Professor Allen offered a replacement from the supply cabinet. He did not address Drin. Sketh replaced the calibrator without a word. His upper hands were very still. His lower hands, below the bench where no one was looking, were not. Dara logged it. Date, time, what she had seen. She had started keeping a second document alongside her lab notes. She did not know yet why she was doing it. She did it anyway. The comments in the corridors were worse than the equipment incidents. Dara heard them when she passed near Dren's group. Things about Vrathi eating habits. Things about what Sketh's kind did in a fight, said in a tone that made violence sound like a character flaw. Other students would hear and look away, or worse, smile just slightly. She passed Counselor Riva's office twice and slowed down both times. The first time she kept walking. The second time she stopped, read the posted office hours, and noted that they ended before the lab sessions began and opened after they finished. Convenient that on a Thursday evening, she was on her way back from the station's small library when she heard voices in the corridor ahead, the kind of cluster of voices that arranged themselves into a shape with one person at the center of the pressure and everyone else on the outside of it. She turned the corner and saw Dren and two of his group, and Sketh back against the wall, equipment case at his feet, with nowhere useful to go. Dara stopped. She was small. She had no allies behind her. She had nothing useful in her hands. The logical thing was to keep moving, file another entry in her document, and let the station's official systems handle it in their own time. Her feet stopped moving before she made the decision. Then, slowly, she turned around and walked back. Her hands were shaking by the time she rounded the corner. She noticed that, recorded it somewhere in the back of her mind, and kept walking anyway. Shaking hands were a biological response to stress. They did not have to mean anything about what she was going to do. Dren had his back to her. His two friends were slightly to the side, more audience than participants. Sketh had not moved from the wall. He was very still in the way that Dara had come to understand was not calm. It was control. His lower hands were at his sides, flat and deliberate. His upper arms were folded. He was making himself as unthreatening as possible, and it was clearly not working because Dren was still talking, voice low and amused, the particular tone of someone who enjoyed having an audience for their cruelty. Dara walked until she was standing just behind and to the left of Dren. "I need my lab partner," she said. Her voice came out level. She was mildly surprised. Dren turned. He looked down. She came up to roughly his collarbone, and his expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and then amusement so fast it was almost impressive. His friends made a sound behind him, the Halori equivalent of snicker. "The human," Dren said in Union Standard. He said it the way someone would say the word pebble while holding a boulder. "Your lab partner is busy." "He doesn't look busy," Dara said. "He looks like he's waiting for this to end." She paused. "So am I." Dren stared at her. She looked back. She was aware that her heart was doing something extremely unhelpful in her chest, but her face was not her heart, and she had years of practice keeping the two separate. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere further down the station ring, a ventilation unit hummed its slow and steady note. She did not look away from Dren's eyes. This was a calculated choice. She had read enough about Halori social structure in her first week of cultural orientation to know that looking away first was a signal. She did not want to send that signal. Dren was larger than her. Stronger, certainly. His kind had triple density bone structure. She had read that in the xenobiology files, not as a threat assessment, just as a fact she had absorbed the way she absorbed all facts. He could have simply moved her to the side with one hand, and she could have done nothing about it, that he didn't. There was a long moment where Dara genuinely did not know what was going to happen, and she was standing so still that she could feel her own pulse in her fingertips. Then Dren made a sound, dismissive, designed to sound like boredom, and stepped back. "Not worth my time," he said, to his friends, to the corridor, to no one in particular. His friends followed his lead. They walked away. Their footsteps faded. Dara breathed out. She turned to Sketh. He was looking at her with an expression she could not fully read, but there was something in it that did not look like the controlled blankness she was used to seeing from him. "Lab report," she said. "I figure we should go over the pressure variance section." Sketh looked at her for another moment. Then he picked up his equipment case from a floor. "It is late," he said. His Union Standard was precise, slightly formal, each word chosen carefully. "The labs are closed." "I know," she said. "I just didn't want to stand here anymore." They walked back toward the residential sector. Not together exactly. He matched her pace, which for him meant walking very slowly. but in the same direction with no particular urgency through corridors that were mostly empty. He did not say anything else. She did not push. She went to her dorm, sat on her bunk, and realized her hands were still slightly unsteady. She pressed them flat on her knees and held them there until they stopped. She sent her mother a voice message. She talked about the food, the ceiling tiles, the reading she was behind on. She did not mention the corridor. She did not know how to explain it yet, even to herself. Over the next few days, she noticed things. The group that usually occupied Junction 4 in the evenings, Dren's group, was not there when she walked through. She used that junction every night. She had started taking mental notes of its occupancy out of habit that a tool sleeve she had misplaced 3 days ago appeared on her section of the lab bench, neatly placed with no note. The maintenance corridor she used as a shortcut to the library, a narrow, dim stretch that she had never loved walking through alone, had its overhead panels on and fully bright every time she passed. She had never seen them all working at once before. She sat with these facts. She arranged them the way she arranged data in the lab. Looking for a pattern, looking for a cause. She thought about what Dren's face had looked like when he'd stepped back. Not scared, not respectful. Something closer to recalculated. Like something had changed in his assessment of the situation that he hadn't expected. She thought about Sketh, who always knew where everyone in the room was. She thought about what it would mean to someone who watched the way Sketh watched to see a person stand still and not run. She opened her observation document that night and added a new section. Not lab notes. Something else. She titled it, Things I Did Not Do Alone. Dara did not confront Sketh immediately. She was not, by nature, someone who rushed conclusions. She let the evidence gather. 2 more weeks. 12 more entries in the document she had titled Things I Did Not Do Alone. The maintenance corridor, always lit. The path near Junction 4. Always clear of Dren's group by the time she arrived. A loose panel in the corridor near the science block that she had reported to maintenance 3 times with no result, fixed overnight after she had mentioned it in passing to no one in particular while standing outside the lab. A station map update flagged on her tablet. Anonymous. Marking 2 corridors as currently unsafe due to pressure leak, which she had been using. She switched routes. The corridors appeared on the official safety report 4 days later. She had also started paying attention to angles. Sketh, she had noticed, moved around the station in patterns that looked random until you mapped them. She had mapped them. He was never behind her. He was always at a position where he had a sight line to wherever she was going next. Lab to cafeteria. He would pass through the connecting corridor 2 minutes before she did. Library to residential block. There was a secondary walkway that ran parallel to the main one, with viewing panels that looked out onto the primary path. She had started checking those panels. She never saw him looking directly at her. That was the part that impressed her most. That on a Wednesday afternoon, with 20 minutes left in the lab session, she closed her notes and looked directly at Sketh. You adjusted the lighting in Corridor 9, she said. Not a question. His upper hands continued moving very slightly over the equipment. Then they stopped. Maintenance schedules vary, he said. The panels in that corridor have been broken since I arrived. I reported them. Nothing happened. She waited. 3 days after the corridor incident, they were fixed. That same week, the parallel walkway near the library had all its secondary panels on. I checked the station maintenance logs. No work order. He was very still. I also checked the security rotation for Junction 4, she continued. Dren's group moved their evening location 11 days ago. The new spot they're using is near the west residential block, far from my route. Silence. I'm not upset, she said, because she felt she should clarify that. I like to know things accurately. Sketh set down the instrument in his upper right hand. He turned to look at her fully, which he rarely did. You should not have been in that corridor alone, he said finally. The Junction 4 situation was, I simply adjusted some information that Dren's group received about security patrol timing. You moved them. I redirected them. She sat with that for a moment. Why? She asked. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. The lab around them was full of the usual noise, equipment, conversation, Professor Allen making notes at the front bench. In Vrathi, he said at last, There is no clean word for it in Union Standard. There is an act when someone places themselves in the space between you and harm, with nothing to gain and nothing to use. It is not a favor. It is not a debt. It is. He stopped. He seemed to be looking for a word that was not there. It changes the structure of things. Between two people, it is permanent. Dara looked at him. It creates a bond. Not exactly. It creates a direction, an orientation. It is like when a stone is placed in water, the water moves around it whether it wants to or not. You place yourself. The water is moving. She thought about this. It was the longest he had spoken to her in one stretch. She did not want to interrupt it. "Does it bother you," she asked, "that the stone was a human?" He looked at her for a moment that was hard to read. "Before you," he said carefully, "I had been on this station for 6 months. In 6 months, no one moved toward me who was not required to by assignment or instruction." A pause. "When I moved, people moved away. It is the standard response. I had accepted it." His secondary jaw shifted slightly, which she had started to understand was not aggression. It was something more like feeling, surfacing. "You did not move away. I know what it's like," she said simply, "to try to take up less space than you actually need." He looked at her. She looked back. "I have been," he paused, "watching over you. I know. I will continue. I know that too." She picked up her stylus. "I'm going to keep recording things, in case they become useful." He turned back to the equipment. "That is also useful," he said. And that was that point. 3 days later, a notice appeared on the station board. Sketh's name, a formal complaint filed by Dren. The complaint stated that Sketh had threatened him in the Junction 4 corridor 6 weeks ago. It requested a conduct hearing. The potential outcome, listed at the bottom of the notice in small, clean Union Standard text, was expulsion from the academic program. Dara read it twice. She felt the stones settle in her chest again. The same one from the night of the mural, but heavier now. She went back to her room and opened her observation document. She read through every entry. Dates, times, what she had seen, what she had heard. Then she opened a new file and began composing a formal request to Counselor Riva's office. Request for witness testimony at conduct hearing. Filed by Dara Novak, human exchange student, year 1, that she pressed send before she could think too carefully about it. The hearing room was small and deliberately neutral. No species-specific seating arrangements, no atmospheric adjustments for comfort. Just plain chairs, a long panel table, and the particular kind of silence that official spaces manufacture on purpose. Counselor Riva sat at the center of the panel, flanked by 2 junior administrators Dara did not recognize. Riva was a Luri, long-limbed, pale-skinned, with the careful stillness of someone who had sat on many panels and learned that stillness implied authority. She had acknowledged Dara's testimony request with a reply so brief it was almost architectural. Received. Attendance confirmed. Dren sat on one side of the room with 3 of his group, all of whom had filed supporting statements. They were relaxed in the particular way of people who expected things to go their way. 2 of them were talking quietly. One of them glanced at Dara when she entered and then looked away, which she noted. Sketh sat alone on the other side. He had not looked at Dara when she came in. He was sitting with the posture she recognized, compressed, careful, taking up less space than his frame required. His equipment case was at his feet, which made no practical sense at a hearing, but she understood it anyway. It was the one familiar thing in the room. Dara sat down, placed her tablet on her knee, and waited. The hearing opened with Riva reading the complaint into the official record. Dren's version of events was smooth and simple. Sketh had cornered him in Junction 4, behaved in a threatening manner, and used his physical size to intimidate. Dren's voice, as he described it, was measured and sad in a performed way that Dara recognized from a certain type of person she had encountered all her life. The 3 supporting witnesses confirmed the story in almost identical language, which she also noted. Riva turned to Sketh. "Do you wish to respond to the account as presented?" Sketh said no. Dara looked at him. He was looking at the table that Riva's expression shifted, barely perceptibly, toward a conclusion she had probably already reached. "Then we will proceed to I have testimony," Dara said. Riva paused. She looked at Dara the way people often looked at Dara, as if recalculating whether the small, quiet human in the corner was actually going to be relevant. "You are Ms. Novak. You filed as a witness for the respondent." "Yes." "You may proceed." Dara opened her tablet. "I'll start with the date the complaint references." She read the date from the record. "At that time, Sketh and I were lab partners. I had been observing the dynamic between Drin's group and Sketh for several weeks prior. I kept a record. Drin's posture changed slightly. One of his group stopped talking. On the evening in question," Dara continued, "I was present in Junction 4 corridor. I witnessed the interaction. Drin and two members of his group were positioned between Sketh and the corridor exit. Sketh did not move toward Drin at any point. He was stationary against the wall when I arrived." She paused. I intervened. I asked Drin to leave. He did. Riva was looking at her more carefully now. "You were present." "Yes." "That was not in the original witness list." "No one asked me," Doris said. "So I asked myself." She turned to the next entry in her document. "I also have records of 5 prior incidents involving Drin's group and Sketh, with dates, times, and descriptions. The broken equipment in the lab on the 19th. The comments made in the cafeteria corridor on the 23rd and 28th. The defacing of the Vrathi cultural mural at Junction 7, which I witnessed directly." She looked at Riva. "I can read all of them, or I can send the document to the panel now and you can read them at your own pace. Either's fine with me." The room was very quiet. Riva looked at the document Dara transmitted to the panel display. She scrolled slowly. Her expression did not change exactly, but something behind it did. Drin leaned over to one of his group and said something low and fast in Halori. Dara did not speak Halori. She did not need a point one of the junior administrators asked. "You documented all of this in real time?" "I document things I observed," Dara said. "I've always done this. Quiet people tend to see more than people expect." "Why?" Riva asked. Not unkindly, but directly. Dara thought about the honest answer. "Because I knew that someone eventually was going to need someone to have been paying attention." The panel conferred. It was not a long conference. Riva addressed Drin directly. His supporting witnesses were asked to restate their accounts in light of the new documentation. The first one did so with considerably less confidence. The second declined. The third asked if they were required to continue. The complaint against Sketh was dismissed. Drin was referred to a formal conduct review, which carried its own consequences that Riva delivered in the dry, level tone of someone reading a supply manifest. When it was over, the room cleared quickly. Sketh was the last to stand. He picked up his equipment case. Dara was still at her side of the room, putting her tablet away without rushing as he crossed the room. He stopped a reasonable distance from her, the careful, considered distance she had grown used to from him. Then he said her name. Not the human. Not lab partner. Her name. The way he said it was careful and exact, like something he had rehearsed to get right. "Dara," he said. She looked up. He did not say anything else for a moment. Whatever he wanted to say did not seem to have a shape and union standard that satisfied him. He settled, finally on, "You kept the record." "I told you I would," she said. He nodded once, slowly, and walked out. Dara stood alone in the empty hearing room for a moment, looking at the neutral walls, the plain chairs, the long table where something fair had happened, quietly, without anyone raising their voice. She sent her mother a voice message from the corridor outside. She said things were going well. She said she thought she might be starting to understand the station. She did not say, "I think I have a friend." She was still working out what word to use. Word spread the way it always did on Vora Station. Not in announcements or broadcasts, but in the slow, sideways movement of information through clusters of students who had nothing more urgent to do than observe and interpret. Dara did not know exactly what was being said. She had no particular interest in tracking it, but she noticed the change the way she noticed everything, quietly, accurately, without announcing it. The Thari students near the warm vents had started acknowledging her when she passed. Not warmly, not conversationally, just a small fold of their outer feathers, a motion she had looked up one evening and found to be a gesture of basic recognition. "We see you. You are here. This is noted." Coming from Thari, this was apparently not nothing. .2 Luri students in her morning lecture had started choosing seats in her row. She had occupied that row alone for 6 weeks. She had not changed her habits. They had changed theirs. Even Professor Allen had done something almost imperceptible. He had started directing complex lab questions to their bench before the others, in a way of a teacher who has recalibrated which students are worth the harder problems. None of this was dramatic. None of it involved speeches or ceremonies or the kind of visible shift that would be easy to point to. It was the station quietly reorganizing its small, invisible assumptions about who was worth paying attention to. Dara understood this. She had been reorganizing her own assumptions about things her whole life. Sketh noticed it too. She could tell by the way he moved through the station now. Fractionally less compressed, the upper arms not quite so tightly folded when he walked the main corridors. He still sat alone at his usual cafeteria table, but the radius of empty seats around him had narrowed slightly. A Thari student had sat 2 seats away last Thursday and not moved when Sketh shifted in his chair. Small things. Dara had developed great respect for small things. Their lab sessions continued. Professor Allen had shifted the course into more complex territory. Multicellular adaptation studies, long cycle documentation, the kind of work that rewarded patience and precise observation over speed. They were, without discussion, the most consistent partnership in the class. Sketh had started teaching her a few things she had not asked to learn. He did this without ceremony. Simply explained a calibration method she had been doing less efficiently, or adjusted her handling of a specimen without commenting on the fact that he was doing it. She absorbed what he offered and did not make it larger than it was. This seemed to be the right approach. He continued doing it. She had started teaching him things in return. Not lab technique. The other kind. She taught him how to read a human face when it was covering fear. She had described it in the careful language she used for lab notes. The specific position of the lower eyelids, the particular stillness of a jaw being held deliberately, the breath rate that gave things away regardless of expression. He had listened with complete attention. He said it was useful. She believed him. She taught him that when a human said, "I'm fine," without meeting your eyes, they were not fine, and the useful response was not to address it directly, but to hand them something simple to do with their hands. He had absorbed this and filed it. 2 days later, when she arrived at the bench with the flat, careful expression she knew she wore when she had slept badly, he had passed her the instrument checklist without comment. She had started working through it. By item 4, she had felt better. She did not point this out. Neither did he. One afternoon, near the end of the 2nd month, she asked him to teach her 3 words in Vrathi. She did not have a specific reason. She told him it was for the cultural documentation module. He gave her a look she had come to understand as skeptical, which on his face was a very small thing, a slight tilt of the upper jaw, but she had cataloged it. He taught her 3 words. One that meant, roughly, the state of being prepared for something difficult. One that meant a ground that holds firm. And one that had no clean translation. It was the word for the bond created when someone stood between you and harm. He said it slowly and let her practice the sounds. Her pronunciation was not good. He corrected it twice without apparent frustration. On the 3rd attempt, he made a sound that she was fairly certain was the Vrathi equivalent of amusement. She filed that sound in the document she had been keeping. She labeled it. First time down on the last Friday of the month. She sat down at her corner table in the cafeteria with her usual tray of nutrient blend and opened her tablet. The cafeteria was full, 400 voices, the warm buzz of 30 species going about their evenings. She was used to this being background noise she sat separate from. Sketh put his tray on the table across from her. He did not ask. He sat down, opened his own tablet, and began reading that he said nothing. She said nothing. They ate in the comfortable quiet of 2 people who did not need to fill space with words. Dara looked up once, briefly, at the ceiling. She had not counted the tiles in several weeks. She counted them now, not because she needed to, but out of something like affection for the habit. 412 that everything else was different. Later that night, she recorded a voice message for her mother. She talked about the food, which was still not good. She talked about the lab module, which was getting more interesting. She said the station was enormous and loud and sometimes strange. She said she thought she was starting to feel a home in it. She did not explain the wrathy student who had eaten dinner across from her. She did not know yet how to translate it. Not because she lacked words, but because some things settle into a shape before they settle into language. She knew this. The station had looked at humanity and seen something unremarkable. Soft creatures, medium-sized, no particular advantages. And then a quiet girl from a corner table had stood still in a corridor and not run, and kept a careful record, and said what she had seen in a room where it mattered. Not loudly, not heroically, just precisely and on time. The galaxy, it turned out, had not been expecting that.